So to start with, do you just want to tell me a little bit about the Pirate Party, what it stands for? Because it's not just a funny name and a funny logo.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when they hear the name, the Pirate Party, they do assume that it's a joke party, you know, like we're the Monster Raving Loonies, but we're not. Like you say, it is a serious party. It was born out of there were some trials in Sweden in the mid to late 2000s, and that spawned a lot of different pirate parties around the world, sorry. And in this country, the Pirate Party in the UK started in 2009, and we mainly campaign for internet freedoms, privacy, an end to mass surveillance and copyright reform. But we do have policies in all other major areas as well, but our main focus is on the internet and freedom and privacy.
So where does the piracy come into it then?
Well, piracy was around the Pirate Bay trials that the party was kind of started up, and in theory we're not in favour of piracy per se, but we want a change, a copyright reform essentially, which would essentially, what we're calling for now would be considered piracy if you were to do it nowadays, but we want a change in the law so that it's not considered piracy anymore. And yeah, it's just a lot of the things that you do on the internet that we consider would be fine, like, you know, potentially downloading a song that's 50 years old that still has copyright on it. We think that might be incorrect. We think copyright should have shorter amounts of time attached to it.
But does that not put the rights of content creators at risk?
Well, there's certainly questions around you know, the rights of content creators. I think the problem with a lot of content nowadays, certainly in terms of music, is that the content is actually owned by large corporations rather than the creators themselves. When artists sign up to record deals, the ownership passes on a lot of the time to the record companies, and they generally hold on to that. And actually, artists don't tend to make a lot of money from the actual sale of records. They make a lot of their money from tour dates and things like that. And we'd actually like to pass more of the money onto artists.
So when, for example, someone like Taylor Swift takes her songs off Spotify because she considers that to not be a worthwhile way to distribute music, is that something you, as a party, that sort of principle, are against?
Yeah, I think we're against. Well, we're against Taylor Swift's stance, I'd say. I mean, we're for the free distribution of information and music and things like that. I think there are, obviously, you know, Spotify is not a perfect model, but I think it is a good system in that it allows for much more music to be shared, and people can enjoy that content far more cheaply than they would otherwise, but it's still a legal means to do it, and the artists are still getting compensated in some way. So, I mean, there's obviously a difficult balance. I think it's interesting with the internet. I mean, stuff that, you know, because if you stole a CD from HMV, that's obviously stealing, whereas people morally are much happier to download the CD from the internet. And like I say, people that would be totally against taking something from a shop would happily take the equivalent off the internet. So I think there's a kind of moral divide between, say, reality and the internet. I think we want to kind of try and bridge that and say, is there a compromise? Because we don't necessarily want people taking stuff for free off the internet, like just torrenting tons and tons of music, but equally we know that people are doing that, and there needs to be a way to deal with it, because at the moment, you know, there isn't an effective plan to actually deal with that kind of thing. And I think if you try and make music more freely available but still find a way to compensate the artist, it's surely got to be better than what it is at the moment, where people just torrent things for free and the artist gets nothing.
But is that not just compromising with thieves? You wouldn't compromise with someone who stole a CD from HMV, even if lots and lots of people were doing it. Oh,
I mean, that's very true, but I think it's far more difficult to police things like the internet. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, we'll put a security guard, we've got CCTV on HMV. It is actually very difficult to police people torrenting things on the internet, certainly, especially from overseas sites. the UK government can struggle to control overseas sites. Obviously, they have the ability to tell IPs to block access to certain sites, but we would say, you know, that's not a free internet. And obviously then, if the UK government has the power to block certain sites, which, like, say, the Pirate Bay, obviously, in theory, that might be a positive, but once they have that power, they can use that against other sites that might be, you know, just anti-government or things like that, and it can kind of spiral out of control. So, I mean, it is difficult, but I think there has to be a compromise to be reached, because it's just not as easy to police the internet as it is to police, you know, let's say real life. Obviously, the internet is still real life, but, you know.
So, do you say you're a single issue party, or at least a sort of single area party?
I'd say we are kind of a single area party. I'd compare our stance to the Green Party in a sense. Obviously, the Greens were founded on environmental principles, and they still argue on environmental principles a lot of the time, but they do have policies in all other major areas, you know, the economy, health, welfare, transport, etc. And we're very similar to that. Obviously, our main campaigning point and the thing that we're named after, and the thing that we mostly talk about, is internet rights and surveillance and copyright reform. But we do still have things to say on all other areas of policy.
Do you not... Well, it's interesting there that you mentioned the Green Party, because in Sheffield Central, where you're standing, there are 3 existing strong left or centre-left candidates in Paul Blomfield, Shafak Mohammed and Natalie Bennett from the Green Party. Do you feel like you're just sort of further splitting the vote on the left side of the political spectrum?
Well, I've been asked this quite a few times now, and I think it's certainly an important debate to have. Obviously, a big priority is to try, and certainly for myself, is to try and stop the Conservatives winning the election. But equally, I think it is very important for minor parties to still be able to stand and still be able to get their voice out there. I admit that I personally share a few views with the Green Party and potentially with the Liberal Democrats and Labour as well, but certainly myself and the Pirate Party still have a lot of differences between ourselves and those parties, and I think they need to be heard. And every vote that I gain in this election will show whoever does get elected that yes, I do have a lot of similarities, and whoever voted for me probably, you know, shares similarities with whoever might get elected, but they still believe in copyright reform, in privacy, in anti-surveillance, and those are not things that any of the other parties standing in Sheffield Central are really pushing, and I think that's important that I stand here so that we can push that.
But say you got several thousand votes, which would be a very good return for the Pirate Party based on previous performances, but allowed a Conservative candidate, say, to win the seat here in Sheffield Central. Would you feel happy with that? Is that a result you'd welcome? I
mean, at the highest level, I would be very happy, because it will prove to whoever wins, be it a Conservative or Labour or Liberal Democrat, that many people in this constituency feel very strongly about the issues that our party is campaigning on. And I think that's very important to get across. Even in a very divided election, I think it's important that people still vote along ideological lines. And certainly I would be disappointed that a Conservative candidate had been elected, but first and foremost, I'd be extremely happy that we'd got that many votes, and that we'd be able to show to whoever was elected that there's a lot of people that care about these issues, and that they should notice them, because certainly the Conservatives are doing a lot to harm internet freedoms and privacy, and they're absolutely expanding the surveillance state. And I think if a Conservative was elected, it'd be important to be able to show them that there's a lot of people that are against that.
Do you not feel then that you could perhaps do better if you worked with an existing political party as a wing of that, or as a pressure group perhaps?
I would probably be against that, because I think one of the main ways in which to get your voice out to people is to stand, and is to have your name and the name of the party on a ballot paper. And admittedly, I may have some influence within an existing political party, but certainly we'd have a lot less influence than being able to get our name on the ballot paper, be doing interviews like this where we're getting our voice across, being in newspapers, whatever, and showing people that we are out there, we are an alternative. And I think we do have more impact on the debate as an independent party than as part of an existing party.
Now, a little bit about you personally as a candidate. You are a student here at the University of Sheffield, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And as a student, do you feel then that you have a greater perspective on student issues than perhaps the other candidates?
I'd certainly like to think so. I mean, I've been a student here at Sheffield for 4 years now. I did a 3-year undergraduate in politics, and I'm now studying a master's degree in town planning. I think I do have a greater grasp of student issues. I mean, I've lived that life for the last 4 years. I know the issues that there are with student finance and being able to pay your rent on time and being able to pay your tuition on time. You know, I know the issues with student safety in and around the university, certainly at night especially. And, you know, I think I have got a greater grasp of that because I've actually lived that. And I know a lot other candidates will have been students and may even be students, but, you know, I'm still a student and I have been for the last 4 years, and I live in this constituency, and I have for the last 4 years as well. So I have a good idea of what people want and what people need in this constituency.
And what would you as an MP be able to do to improve things for students in Sheffield?
Well, the main education policy that I'm pushing is the abolition of tuition fees, and I would also try and raise maintenance loans, because I know at the moment that maintenance loans sometimes don't even cover the entire cost of rent, never mind the cost of food, you know, drinks, everything else that goes along with living as a student for a year. I'd also try and introduce maintenance grants, certainly so that poorer students don't have to worry about paying back the loans once they leave university.
And is there anything in the party manifesto to say how this would be funded? Would you introduce a graduate tax if somehow the Pirate Party became a party of government?
Well, I think it's possible to fund this without introducing any new taxes. Certainly there's areas in which I'd make savings, like I would abolish the Trident nuclear missile system, which currently uses billions and billions of pounds every year. I would use some of that money to fund the abolition of tuition fees.
But realistically speaking, you personally are probably not going to be elected here in Sheffield Central. The party is unlikely to win an MP nationwide. So what is your aim from this election?
Well, the main aim of running for any party, well, obviously is to get elected, but I admit it's a very slim chance that I will actually win. But other than that, it's about raising awareness about the party. So I want, you know, once your name's on the ballot paper, as I said before, once the party's on there, you have people talking about you, have people looking up, reading about you. I mean, there should hopefully be people that look at the fact that I'm standing and will go look into the party and hopefully, like I did in 2015, say this resonates with me, I'd like to actually join and be a part of this. And the other thing is that however many votes we get, that shows whoever is elected on June the 8th, that there's this number of people in Sheffield Central who believe in the party's values, and that hopefully the new MP will take account of that and potentially adjust their views based on that. So, you know, I think it is important still that we do run and we, you know, raise the profile of the party and also show the new MP that people do believe in these kind of views.
Do you feel like there's sufficient interest in Sheffield Central for that to be a likely outcome?
I think there's certainly interest in Sheffield Central. I've already spoken to a few people that have been really interested in our ideals. I think it's going to be a tough election for smaller parties in general, including us, because a lot of people are going to be tactically voting this time around instead of voting along their, you know, for their principles essentially. And I've spoken to people that have said, well, I love your stance against surveillance. You know, I do want a free internet. I do want more privacy, but there's larger issues on the line, and I'm going to vote for Conservative. I'm going to vote for Labour, and I know that that's an issue, but you know, it's about raising the party's profile in the long run. And although this will be a tough election, it's still very, very important that we stand here, and hopefully in future, when potentially politics might calm down a little, we might be able to, people will go back to voting along their principles, and we could potentially increase our vote share then.
But the world is probably at its most unstable for about 30 years. So are digital rights and digital liberties really that important at the moment?
Well, like you say, I mean, there's obviously a lot happening in the world at the moment, and it is rather unstable. But I think these issues, I mean, the world has been through a lot, and there's been a lot of points where we say, well, this is, incredible, how are we going to get through this? And we have moved on. And I think eventually we will move on from the issues that are being talked about now. And the internet is only ever going to become a larger part of our lives. There's more and more devices being connected to the internet nowadays. You can get microwaves and washing machines that connect to the internet, and that poses even greater threats to people's privacy, and it gives the government even greater ability to surveil everyone. And so I think actually internet issues will become even a greater part of the debate in the future.
But that's 10, 15 years down the line. Why are the Pirate Party relevant now?
Well, I mean, you say it's 10 or 15 years down the line, but it is happening now. Obviously, it'll become a greater issue in the future, but it is still happening now. I mean, you could say, oh, climate change is, 50, 100 years down the line. Why do we care about it now? It's much better to be able to nip these kind of things in the bud and say, we'll stop it at its source, rather than waiting till it gets out of hand and then trying to fight against it. And we want to say, well, we don't want to give whoever's in government the powers to spy on every single person through every device that they own, because once we've given them that, it's going to be far harder to take it away. So, yeah.
But looking perhaps at the attacks in Manchester and the attacks in Westminster a few months ago, do you not think that mass surveillance is important from a national security perspective?
I think certainly surveillance is important. I don't want an end to all surveillance, but I think the way that the government goes about it at the moment is not an efficient way to do it. I mean, it's bad for people's privacy, and I think it's also bad for the task of increasing security. If you're accumulating data off every single person, the vast majority of whom will be completely innocent, that's far more data that you're going to have to sift through. Surely it would be far more efficient for the security services to pick up on whoever is committing a crime, or may in the future commit a crime, by, say, they can target people who visit terrorist websites, people who download terrorist manuals, and then surveil them more and potentially arrest them before they do anything. I mean, the security services, has been proven recently, are very, very stretched at the moment. And I think that having to sift through mountains and mountains of data from people who are completely innocent is actually a very inefficient way to do it, and it also hurts people's privacy. So I think both privacy and security can be improved.
Is that not, though, that it's very similar policy to what the Liberal Democrats have in their manifesto to it, put an end to mass surveillance and only do it where there is good reason to? And they're a party with a much greater chance of having a voice in government.
Well, that's very true, but as we've seen in the past, Liberal Democrats are not against going back on their principles, certainly, especially if they're in coalition. And it's also not one of the Liberal Democrats' main things that they're fighting the election on. It's not one of their main policies. The main thing that they're fighting the election on is reversing Brexit. And one of the main policies of the Pirate Party is to end mass surveillance. So I think whilst it's admirable, and I support the Liberal Democrats in that policy, I'm certainly not confident enough in them pushing that through into government that I wouldn't want to campaign on it myself.
Listening to a lot of these policies, they're very much for people who have embraced the internet age. You talk about things like smart washing machines and stuff that actually a very small number of people have. There's still a significant proportion of the country who aren't connected to the internet at all, and generally speaking, older people. Is the Pirate Party a young people's party?
I think to an extent we will mainly appeal to younger people. I mean, there's certainly older people that are very technology savvy, but I admit that, as people get old, as people have got older, then they're more likely to have less technology. They might not use computers regularly or even at all. They might not have even mobile phones. And I think so to an extent our support is going to come from young people. But certainly the young people now, and even people in their 50s and 60s, I mean, my parents are in their 50s and they regularly use computers and, you know, use the internet. These people are going to grow old, and they are all, then everyone will be using computers, you know, in the next 20 or 30 years. And even now, I think there are still issues surrounding the internet that do affect old people. I mean, because of budget cuts, a lot of local authorities and central government as well are moving a lot of the, you know, services over to the internet because it's far, far cheaper than having people in offices to deal with these issues, and that is leaving a lot of older people behind. And I think, as much as we are the party of the internet, I still think it's important that we try and preserve services in person for people that aren't able to use technology as well as younger people are.
Would you say you understand the concerns of older voters?
I would like to think I do understand the concerns of older voters. Obviously, myself, I'm 22, so I'm not, you know, an older voter myself, but I obviously have spoken to older voters when I've been out campaigning, and I have, you know, parents and grandparents, and, you know, obviously I don't understand it as well as someone who might have experienced that themselves, but I'd like to think that I do understand their concerns, certainly surrounding the internet.
You said you're only 22. What would you say to people who would perhaps criticise you for having a lack of life experience, certainly when it comes to the world of employment?
Well, you know, I have worked in my life, obviously not as much as many other people because I have been a student, but I've previously worked in a library and I've also worked in a bar, and I have experienced that. You know, I have earned my own money in the past. But, I mean, it's up to other people. If people want to vote based on, you know, the candidate's work experience, that's perfectly fine, but I personally think they should be voting along the lines of their actual policy and what they bring to the table in terms of, you know, what they would do in Parliament, rather than on that candidate's kind of personal work experience. But I admit I have not worked as much as other people, but I don't think that would work against me if I was in Parliament.
So, one final question. If there's one thing you could say to the students of Sheffield that you think would tip the balance for them to vote in favour of you, what would that be?
Well, you know, I think obviously it's going to be a very close election, and I think a lot of people are going to be voting along tactical lines instead of by their principles. And I'd say to the students of Sheffield, you know, a vote for your principles is not a wasted vote, and smaller parties can influence government even if they're not actually in power.